A widow asked only for water, but the gunslinger's daughter took her hand and whispered, "Mama?" Neither knew how much they needed the other until death came knocking again. The knock wasn't desperate. It was worse than that. Resigned. A soft, hollow tapping against the splintered wood, like someone asking for permission to die on the other side. Clara Boone almost didn't answer. The heat had been brutal all week, stealing breath and sense alike, and her feet still ached from hours spent scrubbing bloodstains out of her late husband's only good coat. But she answered anyway. Not because she was kind, though she was, but because she was too tired not to. What harm could one more sorrow do? She pulled open the door of her half-sunken shack just as the sun dipped low behind the bluffs, turning the sky to embers. A woman stood there alone, barefoot. Dust clung to her hem like she'd walked across 10 counties. Her shawl, what little was left of it, fluttered in the dry wind. Her lips were cracked, her cheeks sunken, and her right hand trembled where it clutched the edge of the doorframe. But her eyes held steady. "I just need water," she said. Her voice was sandpaper in sorrow. Clara didn't move at first. The land wasn't kind to strangers, especially not to women alone. But something about this one, how she didn't beg, didn't plead, just stood there like someone prepared to fall if not given leave to stay upright, made Clara step aside. "You'll find a bucket and pump around back," Clara said. "It's clean. Draw what you need." The woman nodded once, slow, and turned away without another word. Clara watched her go, the backs of her heels leaving prints in the dust. She expected that to be the end of it. She expected never to see her again. She didn't expect the little girl. It wasn't 10 minutes later when Clara heard a whisper behind her. Not outside, inside. The voice of a child, careful and soft, like one might speak to a wounded bird. Clara turned so fast her spine cracked. A little girl stood in the doorway, no more than 5. Pale blonde hair tangled at the ends, a dirty dress barely holding together by the seams. But her eyes were wide and bright as the noonday sun. "Mama," the girl whispered. Clara froze. Her heart thudded like a drum dropped down a well. The girl took a tentative step forward, then another, lifting her hand toward Clara's. She wasn't afraid, not even a little. The back door creaked. Clara spun again just as the barefoot woman reappeared, water dripping from the tin pail in her hands. Her face went pale the moment she saw the child inside. "I told you to wait," she whispered. But the girl didn't even turn. She still looked at Clara, hand half raised, face open and full of something Clara hadn't seen in years. Hope. "I only looked because I heard the broom," the girl said softly, "and I smelled cornbread." Clara blinked. Her hands were still damp from wringing out laundry, her apron stained with ash. She hadn't made cornbread in days, and she hadn't swept the floor in longer. But the girl didn't seem to care. The woman rushed forward now, setting the bucket down with a thud and scooping the child into her arms. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, not looking Clara in the eye. "We'll be gone. Just needed a drink." She turned to go. Clara's voice surprised even herself. "She called me Mama." The woman stopped cold. "She's 4, she said after a long pause. "Not quite 5. Sometimes she gets confused." Clara stepped closer, her boots creaking against the uneven planks of the floor. "She doesn't seem confused." The woman turned halfway, enough to reveal the full shape of her face. She was younger than Clara had first thought, no more than 30, but life had carved its story into every line of her skin. There was grit there, but also grief, deep, old grief, the kind that changes a person forever. "I didn't come for trouble," she said. "Just water. We'll be gone before nightfall." Clara looked at the girl again, now resting her cheek on the woman's shoulder. She was humming quietly off-key, a child's song about horses and wind. "Come inside," Clara said at last. "Both of you." The woman hesitated. "Ma'am, don't make me ask twice." She didn't. They sat at the table a few minutes later, hands wrapped around chipped mugs of boiled chicory. The child, her name was Macy, sat on the floor, tracing patterns in the worn knots of the wood with her fingers. Clara watched her from the corner of her eye, unable to shake the echo of that first word. The woman introduced herself as Jo, short for Joanna, but she said it like someone trying not to be remembered. Clara didn't press. She didn't share her last name, and Clara didn't ask for it. They talked little. Joe answered questions with polite nods, her eyes always scanning the room like a cornered creature waiting for the next trap to spring. She said she'd been traveling west. Said she'd lost her husband, not to bullets or fever, but just to the kind of man he'd become. Said she hadn't planned on taking in the girl. What do you mean, taking in? Joe looked up slowly. Macy ain't mine, not by blood. I found her in the hills 2 months ago, tied to a fence post. Not even a note. Clara's hand tightened around the mug. And you just kept her. What else was I supposed to do? Joe's voice cracked then, not with guilt, but with something far older. She wouldn't stop calling me Mama. Outside, the wind picked up again, stirring dry leaves across the hard dirt. Inside, the silence thickened. You're welcome to stay, Clara said finally. Just the night. I've got a spare room. Joe didn't answer. She was staring at the floor now, where Macy had fallen asleep, curled beside the stove. Her hands shook as she reached down to touch the girl's hair. Clara didn't push, but something had settled in the house that hadn't been there since Robert died. Not joy, not yet, but something quieter, something warm. That night, Clara dreamt of fire. Not flames, not smoke, just heat rising in waves, followed by a scream. She awoke with a start, heart thundering, hands clenched tight around the edge of her blanket. The house was quiet. Too quiet. She rose quickly, stepping past the room where Joe slept with Macy curled beside her. She didn't wake them. Something in her chest whispered not to. But when she opened the door to check the porch, she saw it. Drags. Boot prints in the dirt. Deep ones leading to the house, but not away from it. She turned fast, eyes scanning the darkness. Too late, a voice behind her said softly. She called you Mama too, didn't she? Clara froze. The voice didn't belong to Joe. It wasn't the warm lilt of a child's dreamlike whisper either. It was male, slow and cruelly curious, like a man who already knew the answer and just wanted to hear how it tasted in someone else's mouth. She didn't move. Her breath caught in her throat, stuck behind her ribs like a splinter. She turned slowly, the way a woman turns when she knows running won't matter. A shadow stood in her kitchen doorway, tall and lean, with a coat that dusted the floor and boots too polished for this town. The kind of man who wore consequence like a weapon. In one hand, he held his hat. In the other, a revolver dangled loose from long fingers. Casual but not careless. I asked, the man said again, stepping into the pale moonlight. Did she call you Mama too? Clara's voice came out dry. Who are you? The man tilted his head like a curious wolf. Let's just say I'm a man looking to settle debts. One of them's a child that don't belong where she is. Behind them, the old floorboards creaked softly. Clara's eyes flicked upward in time to see Joe in the hallway, barefoot and silent, with Macy held tight in her arms. The girl was still half asleep, clinging to Joe's collar like she knew the world might slip from under her at any moment. Joe didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her eyes locked on the man like she was staring at a ghost she'd tried to bury more than once. Hello again, Joe, the man said, his voice coated in honey and venom. Joe didn't blink. Didn't expect you to crawl this far south, Seth. Clara's stomach twisted. Seth. Even the name sounded like a splinter. She didn't know him, but she knew the type. Every town had one. A man with a polite voice and dead eyes. The kind who bought law with silver and took flesh with silence. Didn't expect you to be playing house neither, Seth said, stepping closer. Stealing my blood and pretending she's yours. Joe's lips pressed into a thin line. You gave her up, left her to die. Seth's smile never wavered. You don't get to say what I did or didn't do. You don't get to take what's mine. Macy stirred then, blinking against Joe's collar. Her voice came as a whisper. Mama. Seth's jaw twitched. See? Told you. Calls every woman Mama. Don't mean nothing. Clara stepped between them without thinking. She's a child. You've no claim if you abandoned her. Seth didn't even look at her. Lady, this ain't your fight. Clara didn't move. It is now. He raised the revolver slightly. Not aimed, not yet, but enough to speak louder than words. Joe eased forward a step, her grip on Macy tightening. Her voice was low, almost broken. Seth, you know what I saw when I found her? You know what you left? Seth's face darkened. I know I left a girl with your name carved into her memory and a ring around her neck that used to be mine. You left her tied to a fence like a coyote trap, Joe snapped. She was half starved. You didn't care then. You only came now because someone told you I wasn't dead. He raised the revolver a bit higher. And maybe I mean to fix that. A sound cracked the air then, sharp and sudden. But it wasn't a gunshot. It was Macy's voice, clear and frightened and loud enough to startle all three adults still and cold. Don't hurt Mama, she cried. The silence that followed was like glass. Seth blinked. Joe didn't move. Clara felt something rise in her chest. Rage, maybe, or sorrow, twisted so tight it had turned to steel. Seth lowered the gun just a hair, his voice suddenly quieter. Ain't yours, he said again. Macy looked up at Joe, then at Clara, and her lip quivered. I don't want to go with the bad man. That was enough. Clara moved without permission from her body. She grabbed the iron poker from beside the hearth and stepped forward. You need to leave, she said, her voice trembling but solid. You have no law here. No right. Seth turned toward her slowly, his revolver twitching in his grip. And what if I do? The question hung in the air like thunder waiting to break. Then a second sound came, a voice behind them, rough and dry. You'll have to go through me. The door behind Seth creaked wider. A tall figure stepped through, his coat worn to rags, dust caked to his boots, and his face hidden behind the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. He moved like a man used to settling disputes with iron. Clara didn't know him. Joe's breath caught. Isaiah, she whispered. The man tipped his hat back slightly. Joe. Seth's smile thinned. Of course. The preacher with a gun. Figured you'd show. Ain't a preacher anymore, the man said. And I didn't bring a gun. Seth's gaze flicked downward in confusion. I brought a shovel, Isaiah said, and in his right hand he lifted it, old, heavy, and covered in fresh dirt. Clara didn't understand what it meant, but Seth did. His eyes narrowed. You've been digging, Isaiah nodded slowly. One hole behind the shed. Didn't have a name on it yet. Seth's fingers twitched on the revolver. You threatening me? Isaiah didn't blink. I'm just letting the land know what's coming. The room felt like it couldn't hold breath anymore. Seth's face twitched, some silent war playing out behind his eyes. He wasn't a man used to being challenged, and now two strangers stood between him and the girl he'd tossed away like yesterday's spit. For one long second, the room teetered. Then Seth holstered the revolver, slowly, like a snake coiling back into itself. You folks ain't worth dying over, he muttered. Not tonight. He stepped backward, then turned without another word, pushing the door open and disappearing into the dusk. His boots crunched down the steps, then silence. Only when the hoofbeats faded entirely did Clara exhale. Macy was crying now, soft and broken. Joe held her tight, murmuring nonsense into her tangled hair. Clara turned to Isaiah. Who are you? Isaiah looked tired, more tired than any man Clara had ever seen. No one you need to fear, he said. You came looking for Joe. I came looking for peace, he said quietly, but I always find her instead. Joe looked up, her face streaked with tears. You came too late. I came just in time, he replied. As always. The three of them stood in the middle of Clara's kitchen, bound now not by blood or name, but by something far heavier. Debt, danger, and the fragile thread of a child's whispered hope. That night they didn't sleep, none of them. They sat by the stove, drinking chicory and saying little. The wind howled outside, but inside the cabin there was warmth and silence, and the knowledge that whatever came next would come for them all. Just before dawn, Macy stirred and climbed into Clara's lap. She didn't ask for a story. She didn't ask to go home. She just laid her head down and whispered, barely audible, Mama. This time Clara didn't correct her. Clara didn't sleep, even after the light changed. She sat straight in her old wooden chair with Macy curled like a kitten in her lap. Isaiah was snoring quietly in the corner, his hat pulled low over his face. Joe was half awake near the stove, arms wrapped around her knees. The fire had died to embers, but no one moved to stoke it. The stillness of dawn had settled thick over the house, the kind of hush that comes after something sharp breaks, and the pieces are still deciding whether to cut or settle. Macy's breathing had slowed. She was deep asleep, tiny fingers curled around the frayed hem of Clara's apron. Clara looked down at her, unsure whether to move or simply let the child become a part of her, a weight she didn't know she needed. Her chest felt full, tight, like something long buried had stirred itself loose. "Preacher still snores like a thunderstorm," Joe said softly, without looking over. Clara glanced up. "You know him well." Joe didn't answer for a moment. Then she nodded once. "Isaiah and I, we used to ride with the same caravan. Long time ago, before I made a mess of things." Clara raised an eyebrow. "What kind of mess?" Joe cracked a tired smile. "The kind that makes men like Seth hunt you down. The kind that leaves you with blood on your boots and a girl who calls you mama even when you tell her not to." Clara's gaze flicked toward Isaiah. He was still, save for the gentle rise and fall of his chest. She studied the old lines at the corners of his eyes, the way his shoulders slumped like a man who carried more than his own weight. "Why did he follow you?" Clara asked. "He don't seem like the rescuing type." Joe's voice softened. "Because he remembers the girl I used to be, before the desert, before the guns." Clara nodded. She understood that. Sometimes you didn't follow a person because of who they were now, but because of who they'd been when they still believed in something, or someone. Joe stood and stretched, wincing at the stiffness in her spine. "I should go. We brought enough trouble on you already." Clara frowned. "You're leaving." "I have to. Seth doesn't quit easy. He'll be back. And if I'm here, he'll burn this place to the ground just to make a point." Clara's jaw clenched. "You think he won't come anyway?" Joe hesitated. "You think if you walk out now that'll save us?" "I think it'll buy you time," Joe said. "I don't want Macy to grow up thinking every hand that helped her paid for it in blood." Clara looked down again. Macy was stirring now, murmuring nonsense in her sleep. "She thinks you're her mother," Clara whispered. Joe's voice cracked. "I know, and I love her more than anyone else ever let me." Clara swallowed. "Then don't leave her." Joe didn't answer. She just stared at the dying fire, her face twisted in that particular agony only mothers and sinners understand. A groan came from the corner. Isaiah sat up slowly, rubbing the sleep from his face. "You both talk too much," he muttered. Clara smirked. "You snore too loud." He stood, bones popping as he straightened to his full height. "If Seth comes back, he won't come alone. That kind of man never does." Joe looked up sharply. "He'll bring riders." "3, maybe 4, Isaiah said. "Not enough for a war, just enough to teach a lesson." Clara felt a chill settle beneath her skin. "What kind of lesson?" "The kind folks don't survive." A long silence followed. "Then we stay," Clara said finally. "We prepare." Joe blinked. "Clara." "This is my land," she said firmly. "My house. And no man points a gun at a child in my kitchen without answering for it." Joe studied her. "You always been like this?" Clara's lips twitched. "I buried a husband who bled out helping a stranger. He wasn't brave. He was just good. I reckon I'll try to follow his example." Isaiah moved to the window, peering out across the brittle field. "You got a cellar?" Clara nodded. "Trap door under the pantry." "Good. We'll put the girl there if things go bad." Joe flinched. "I'm not leaving her in a hole." "It's not for leaving," Isaiah said. "It's for surviving." Joe didn't like it, but she didn't argue. By noon, the plan had taken shape. Clara's barn hadn't seen livestock in months, but it made for good cover. Joe and Isaiah reinforced the doors, stacked old barrels along the walls, and scattered broken tools like it had been abandoned proper. Joe pulled a rusted rifle from her pack. It was slow, single shot, but accurate. Clara unearthed Robert's old shotgun from the chest beneath her bed. She hadn't touched it since his funeral. The wood was still stained from the flood that nearly swallowed their town the year prior, but it held steady in her grip. Macy didn't ask questions. She helped the way children do, quietly, instinctively. She carried nails in her apron pockets and held candles while Isaiah mapped out the property on the back of a seed bag. She never cried. Not once. That night they ate in silence. Joe and Isaiah took turns watching the horizon, while Clara sat with Macy, telling her stories about horses that never tired and rivers that always ran clear. The child's laughter, small and shy, was the only light in the room. Then morning came, and with it, the sound of hoofbeats. Joe spotted them first. 5 riders, all in black dusters, spread in a V shape like a flock of circling crows. Seth rode in front, his hat low, face unreadable. The man to his right had a long scar down his neck. The one to his left kept flicking a coin in the air. Isaiah stepped out onto the porch slowly. Clara joined him, shotgun in hand. Joe was in the barn, hidden behind old feed crates, her rifle pointed through a narrow crack. Seth stopped a dozen paces from the porch. He smiled. "I gave you a chance to do this the easy way," he called out. Isaiah didn't blink. "This is the easy way." Seth laughed, genuinely amused. "You always were a pain in the backside, preacher." "I'm not a preacher anymore." "Right. Gravedigger now, is it?" Isaiah nodded once. "I've got one ready." Seth's smile faded. "You think you can protect her forever?" "No," Isaiah said calmly. "Just today." That seemed to unsettle Seth. He motioned slightly with his hand. Scarnos dismounted. So did Coinman. The others hung back, their hands on their guns. Seth stepped forward. "Last offer. Send the girl out. I walk away." Isaiah didn't move. Clara raised the shotgun slightly, then a shot rang out. Not from Seth's men, from the barn. Coinman fell, screaming, clutching his leg. Joe's second shot missed, but it was enough. Everything exploded at once. Seth shouted. Scarnos fired blindly toward the barn. Clara fired once, the shotgun's boom deafening. One of Seth's men toppled from his horse. Isaiah charged, fists raised into Scarnos before the man could reload. Chaos. And in the middle of it, Macy screamed. Clara turned, horror twisting her gut. Macy had left the cellar. She was running toward Joe, toward danger. Clara dropped her gun and sprinted, yelling the child's name. But the world had gone deaf. Another shot. Wood splintering. Dust and fire and yelling. Macy ran straight into Joe's arms just as the barn was riddled with bullets. Isaiah tackled Scarnos again, slamming him to the ground. Clara reached them just as Seth raised his revolver and aimed. At Joe. At Macy. Clara didn't think. She dove. The gunshot ripped through the still air, like the final crack of a storm long brewing. Clara didn't feel the bullet. Not at first. She felt only the weight of Macy in her arms, the familiar tightness of protecting something small and warm and fragile. Then came the pain, a deep, dragging burn that knocked the breath from her lungs. Clara crumpled onto the dirt, still clutching the child while Joe screamed her name. Macy's tiny hands reached up in confusion, brushing Clara's face, and it was that touch, gentle and panicked, that kept Clara tethered to the world, even as blood seeped through her blouse and turned the dust beneath her dark. Isaiah roared. Clara heard it from the ground, a guttural, furious sound torn from a man who had seen too many good things ruined. He moved like thunder, slamming into Seth before the man could aim his revolver again. They hit the ground in a tangled mass, fists flying. Isaiah's hat tumbled off. His coat flared open. And in the morning sun, Clara saw the faint gleam of a tin badge hidden beneath the worn fabric. A lawman, or at least he had been once. Seth snarled beneath him, kicking up dust, biting and clawing like an animal cornered in its last fight. But Isaiah didn't let up. He struck again and again until Seth stopped moving, just breathing raggedly, his face unrecognizable beneath the bruises. Joe crawled to Clara, hands shaking as she pressed fabric into the wound. "No, no, no. You don't do this," she whispered. "You don't leave now. Not after all this." Clara's breath came short and ragged. She tried to speak but coughed instead, her mouth filling with the taste of iron. "I've got you," Joe said fiercely, her fingers clamping down hard on the bleeding. "You're not dying for me. You hear me? You're not dying for me," Clara forced a whisper. "Macy, I've got her too." The girl had curled into Clara's side, silent now, her small eyes wide with something far deeper than fear. Recognition. She'd seen this before. Too many times for someone so young. From behind them, Isaiah stood. Dust and blood covered his arms. His lip bled, but he stood. Around them, the world had gone still again. Of Seth's men, only one had fled. The rest lay unmoving. It hadn't been a battle. It had been a reckoning. Isaiah dragged Seth upright by the collar and stared hard into his face. "You come near them again," he said slowly, his voice shaking with something colder than rage, "and I'll bury you so deep your sins won't find you." Seth coughed and spat blood. "You think you get to decide what's justice out here?" Isaiah pressed his face close. "Justice left this land long before we did. I'm not here to serve it. I'm here to end this." He turned to Joe. "You want him dead?" Joe stared down at Clara, then at Macy, then back at Seth. "No," she said softly. "Not here. Not in front of her." Isaiah nodded. He threw Seth down like garbage and pointed toward the horse that had bolted toward the tree line. "Walk." Seth didn't argue. He stumbled off, limping, bloodied, broken. When he was gone, Isaiah exhaled and sank to his knees. The barn smoldered behind them. Joe pressed harder on Clara's wound, but the bleeding had slowed. Clara's eyes fluttered open again. "I liked your stories," Macy whispered. Clara tried to smile. "I've got more." "You're going to tell them all," Joe said, near frantic. "You hear me? You're not finished. Not yet." They worked quickly. Isaiah ran inside for supplies. Joe tore strips from her own dress to wrap the wound tight. The bullet had gone through clean, high in the shoulder. Painful, but survivable. If infection didn't come, if her strength held. By dusk, Clara was propped up in her bed, sweat slicking her brow, but color had returned to her cheeks. Joe sat beside her, one hand on her arm, the other brushing Macy's hair where she lay curled across the foot of the bed. "I thought I was done with people," Clara murmured. Joe smiled faintly. "Me too. Turns out I was just waiting." "For what?" Clara looked at Macy. "For someone worth hurting for." Joe's throat tightened. She didn't answer. She just looked at the child who had been tossed aside like trash, then clung to Joe like she was the whole world. And now that same child had found a new corner of her heart to root into, wordless and permanent. Isaiah stood near the door, arms crossed, watching the horizon through the half-shuttered window. "They'll come again," he said quietly. "Not Seth, not soon, but men like him always breed more of the same." Clara nodded weakly. "Then we make it not worth the ride." Isaiah smiled, just barely. "You've got grit." "I've got a reason," she whispered. Joe looked at him. "You staying?" Isaiah didn't answer for a long moment. Then he set his coat on the hook by the door. "I'll stay as long as I'm needed." The days passed slowly, each one a little softer than the last. The barn had burned halfway to the ground, but what remained was cleaned and salvaged. Isaiah rebuilt it by hand. Joe helped when she wasn't tending to Clara. Macy followed them both, asking endless questions and scattering flowers between the fence posts like prayers. Clara's recovery was slow. She couldn't lift much, couldn't work like she used to, but she found strength in smaller things. Humming lullabies as Macy brushed her hair, shelling peas on the porch while Joe read aloud from old books Clara hadn't touched since Robert died. And every night Macy whispered, "Mama," before sleep, sometimes to Joe, sometimes to Clara. Neither corrected her anymore. One evening, Clara found Joe staring out at the horizon, her expression unreadable. "You thinking of leaving?" Clara asked. Joe shrugged, thinking of everything. "I was never meant to stay anywhere long." "But?" Joe looked back. "But maybe Macy was." Clara nodded. "She's home now." "I'm not sure I know what that means anymore." "You will." A soft silence passed between them. Then from inside the house, a small voice called out, "Mama?" Joe looked at Clara. Clara smiled. "She means you this time." Joe turned and went inside. Clara watched her go, heart swelling with something she'd thought buried years ago. It wasn't just hope. It was belief that broken people could build something unbreakable. Not because they were strong, but because they finally had each other. But even peace comes with shadows. Late that night, after the house had gone still and the wind had returned to its gentle hum, Isaiah stood by the barn, hammer in hand, and paused. He wasn't alone. A figure stepped out from the trees. Not Seth, not one of his kind. A woman, tall, with a coat that reached her boots and a rifle slung across her back. She didn't speak. Isaiah set down the hammer. Didn't expect you to find me. The woman smiled faintly. I always find you, especially when you start putting roots down. Isaiah exhaled. You here for her? The woman tilted her head. I'm here to see if she's really as dangerous as the telegrams say. She's not, Isaiah said. She's tired. She's trying. And the girl. She's better off here than wherever they sent that letter from. The woman stepped closer, the firelight catching her badge. She's not the only one who's being watched, she said quietly. This house has too many ghosts now, Isaiah. Too many stories. He nodded. And yet, here we are. The woman studied him. I'll give you time, but not forever. He didn't flinch. That's all I ask. She turned and disappeared into the night. Isaiah stood alone a while longer, watching the stars, listening to the wind, and wondering how long borrowed time could last before the debt came due. Morning came soft and golden, spilling across the porch like the world had forgotten danger ever passed through. Birds stirred in the branches. The ground still held the scars of the firefight, the splintered post by the barn, the half-burned feed crates, the blood-stained dirt near the path. But there was peace, at least for now. Clara stood by the kitchen window, her left arm still in a sling, the pain in her shoulder a low, steady throb she'd learned to carry. She was cutting apples with one hand, slow but methodical, and her eyes flicked every so often to the open field beyond. Watching, always watching. Behind her, Joe knelt near the hearth with Macy, who was singing a quiet, half-invented song about a horse that flew. She held two carved figurines, one with a painted blue hat, the other shaped like a bear. Isaiah had whittled them both and told Macy they were good luck charms. Whether he believed that or not, no one asked. Isaiah had gone into town the day before, leaving before sunrise. He said he needed nails, powder, a fresh blade for the saw. But Clara had seen the way he checked his saddlebags twice, the way his jaw tensed as he strapped on his rifle. He hadn't said it, but she knew. He was expecting a message, and maybe worse. Clara turned from the window. You ever think about leaving? She asked. Joe looked up. You mean again? Clara nodded. Joe exhaled. I think about it every time I hear the wind rattle the shutters, every time a rider passes on the far trail. But then Macy crawls into bed with me, puts her hand on my cheek, and says she had a dream where I didn't leave. Clara's chest tightened. And then I don't move, Joe said. Not an inch. Macy looked up. Mama, can the bear ride the horse? Joe smiled. He can ride whatever he wants. They were laughing when the sound came. A sharp knock. Not frantic, not weak. Measured, intentional. 3 quick raps on the front door. Clara's hand froze mid-slice. Joe straightened slowly, drawing Macy close. Clara moved first. She picked up Robert's shotgun from the side of the cupboard, cradled it one-handed, and nodded at Joe. Joe stepped behind the doorway. Macy clutched to her chest, both of them silent as the grave. Clara pulled the door open in one swift motion. But it wasn't a rider. It was a boy, 12, maybe 13, clothes too big for his frame, freckles scattered across his nose, and a bloody cloth tied around his left hand. His voice cracked when he spoke. You Clara Boone? Clara blinked. Depends who's asking. I got a letter, he said, from the man who stays here. Said to bring it only if he didn't come back by sunrise. Clara's stomach turned. Isaiah. The boy nodded. Clara took the letter with shaking fingers, broke the seal with her thumb, and unfolded the parchment. Joe stepped closer, eyes scanning Clara's face as she read. The letter was short. Clara, if you're reading this, it means I found something that can't wait. Keep them safe. I'll return if I can. Isaiah Joe's voice was barely a whisper. Where did he go? The boy looked nervous now. Didn't say. Just gave me the letter and a coin. Clara frowned. He give you anything else? The boy hesitated. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn playing card. The ace of spades. Someone had drawn an X across it in thick red ink. Joe's face went pale. She reached forward and snatched the card, staring at it like it might bite. What is it? Clara asked. Joe's voice was thin. It's a mark. A warning. From who? From the Riders of Dust. Clara stared at her. That a gang? Joe nodded slowly. More than a gang. They don't rob banks. They don't raid homesteads. They hunt people. Macy tugged on Joe's sleeve. Like animals. Joe shook her head, crouching to hold the girl. No, baby. They hunt like shadows. Quiet, slow. They make sure you see them coming. Make sure you know you can't stop them. What's he done? Clara turned back to the boy. How far is town? 4 miles. She nodded. You ride straight back. Don't stop. Don't talk to anyone. The boy didn't argue. He turned and ran for the horse waiting by the creek, climbed on, and galloped off. Clara shut the door and turned to Joe. Tell me everything. Joe looked sick. She moved to the table, sat down hard, and closed her eyes. Years ago, I ran with a crew. Not outlaws, not exactly. Just desperate folks. Isaiah was with us. We took a job guarding a caravan. Simple run, 2 weeks north. What happened? They didn't tell us what was inside. Gold, documents, something that mattered to powerful people. We were ambushed. 6 of us died. 1 of theirs, too. Their leader's brother. And now they're hunting Isaiah. Joe nodded. They don't forget. They don't forgive. They just wait. Clara set the shotgun down. Then we don't wait. Joe looked up. We go after him. You don't even know where. He left a map. Joe blinked. What? Clara turned and pulled a folded sheet from beneath the cutting board. Isaiah had drawn it in pencil, just rough lines. Notes scrolled in the margins. Marker tree, half hollow, near Redstone Creek. Tracks lead west from there. 3 days if I move fast. Clara laid it flat on the table. You think he expected us to follow? Joe asked. Clara didn't answer. She just looked at Macy, then at Joe. You trust me? Joe didn't hesitate. With everything. They packed quickly. Food, water, guns, blankets. Joe saddled Clara's mule. Clara tucked Macy's toys into her satchel. She stared at the child a long while, brushing hair from her eyes. You'll stay here, Clara said softly. Macy shook her head. No, baby. If I stay, you don't come back. Clara felt her throat tighten. Joe crouched. You need to protect the house. Watch the porch. Keep the fire going. Macy's eyes welled up. You'll come back? Joe nodded. We promise. And they left her there at the threshold with the shotgun too big for her arms propped against the wall and tears drying on her cheeks. It was the hardest part. They rode hard through the canyon, the sky bleeding orange over the rocks, the wind pulling strands of hair from Joe's braid. Clara led the way, her pain flaring with each jolt of the mule. But she didn't slow. The trail narrowed past Redstone, and soon they found the tree. Half hollow, marked with a knife slash. Tracks led west. They followed. At dusk, they found Isaiah's coat draped over a rock. Bullet holes torn through the back. Joe dismounted, fingers trembling as she lifted it. Inside the pocket, another card. This one burned around the edges. Clara stared at the horizon. He's not dead. You don't know that. I do. Joe nodded once. Then we keep riding. They pressed on into the night, toward a fire in the hills, toward whatever waited in the dark. The fire was too steady to belong to Isaiah. That was the first thing Clara noticed. It didn't flicker like a wanderer's cook fire, low and uncertain, but pulsed with purpose. A camp built by men who knew how to control the dark. She and Joe crouched atop a rocky ridge just before midnight, half hidden by scrub and boulders, eyes fixed on the orange glow below. The land stretched wide beneath them, jagged and dry, and at its heart sat the camp. 3 tents, 4 horses tied to a crooked pine, and 5 shadows circling the fire. But no sign of Isaiah. Joe adjusted the sight on her rifle, lips drawn into a hard line. They're waiting for someone. Clara's eyes didn't leave the fire. You sure? They're not eating, not talking, just walking in circles. That's a waiting kind of posture. Clara nodded. Her shoulder throbbed from the ride, but adrenaline kept her upright. You see him? Not yet. They waited. Down below, one of the riders finally spoke, his voice too low to carry. Another laughed, a sharp bark that didn't match the tone of the night. Joe flinched. I know that laugh. she whispered. That's Harlan Crow. Clara glanced over. He was part of the original ambush, Joe said. The one that left Isaiah's brother dead. Harlan's the kind of man who will drown your dog to see if you'll cry. He enjoys pain. He remembers every face that's ever crossed him. Then why are they still here? Because they want Isaiah to come to them. They want him to see what they'll do. Clara looked down again. This time she noticed it. A shape slumped near the fire, half shadowed by one of the tents. It could have been a pile of cloth, but something about the outline caught her attention. There, she whispered, left of the fire. Joe adjusted her scope, exhaled slowly. That's him, hands tied, face down. You sure? Yeah, he's got a scar on his knuckle, left hand. I saw it flash in the firelight. Clara's throat tightened. Can you hit them from here? Maybe two, then they'll scatter. Clara's mind raced. What if we flank? You draw them off. I circle around. With your arm? It barely works enough to swing. They'll kill him by morning, Clara said. You know that. Joe's jaw clenched. We move on my shot. I hit the fire, scatter them. You drop low, come in from the south. I'll keep their attention. Don't get killed. I'll try not to. Clara moved first, sliding backward off the ridge and circling wide. In her good hand, she held the revolver Isaiah had left behind. The shot came. Joe's rifle cracked like thunder once, twice, followed by a hiss of sparks as the fire scattered. Men cursed. A second shot sent one of the horses bolting. Clara dropped low, crawling through the brush. She heard shouting. Then she saw him. Isaiah, still tied, blood on his face, his shirt torn, but he was breathing. She moved fast. A shadow appeared, one of the riders. Clara lunged, bringing the butt of the revolver down hard on the man's knee, then his throat. He collapsed. She reached Isaiah, cut the ropes. He gasped, blinking through swollen eyes. Clara, you picked a hell of a time for a vacation. He smiled barely. She pulled him upright, dragging him toward the rocks. Then she saw the others coming back. Harlan among them, tall, lean, face like carved bark, his eyes locked on her. There she is, he said, his voice too calm. Little Clara Boone. He raised his rifle. A shot rang out, but not from him, from the ridge. Joe's third shot hit Harlan in the leg. He staggered back, cursing. Clara didn't stop. She half-carried Isaiah to the rocks. They tumbled behind cover as a bullet chipped the stone above her head. Joe fired again, then silence. They ran, Joe's voice close now. The wounded ones first, the rest followed. She knelt beside them. Harlan was still bleeding by the dead fire. Isaiah groaned. You shouldn't have come. Clara smiled faintly. Neither should you. Joe knelt by Isaiah, touching his face gently. You look like a wreck. You look like hell, he muttered back. Joe kissed his forehead. They reached Clara's homestead 3 days later. Macy met them at the gate, barefoot and wild-haired, tears already falling. I knew, she said, arms around Clara's waist. I knew you'd come back. Clara kissed the top of her head. You were brave. I didn't cry. Not much. They got Isaiah inside, laid him down, cleaned his wounds. By the time the moon rose again, they were all asleep. For the first time in weeks, there were no bad dreams. But outside, beneath the pines, a different fire burned. One of the riders had not fled, and he wasn't alone. Morning broke soft and golden, spilling across the porch like the world had forgotten danger ever passed through. The house didn't stir. Clara slept in the rocking chair. Joe lay on the floor with Macy cradled against her chest. Isaiah, still pale, dozed in the bed. It was the kind of peace no one trusted, the kind that felt borrowed. And outside, beneath the trees, a lone figure watched the house. He stood motionless, cloaked in dark oilskin, his face hidden behind a bandana the color of dried blood. Beside him were 2 horses. On the second horse sat a child, a boy barely older than Macy. His hands were tied, a wide strip of linen covering his mouth, but his eyes were wide open, watching the house with something deeper than fear. The rider stepped forward, leading both horses with slow, deliberate steps. He didn't hurry. He didn't need to. When Joe woke, Clara was already at the stove. We need to talk about staying, Clara said quietly. Joe sat up slowly. I've never stayed anywhere longer than a season. You've never had a reason to. Joe glanced at the sleeping child beside her. I might now. The knock came just as Clara reached for the matches. Not urgent, not timid. 3 raps. Clara's hand froze. Joe was already moving, her rifle in hand. She pressed Macy back against the blanket, a finger over her lips. Clara pulled the door open. The man stood there alone. Dusty boots, broad shoulders, a gun low on his hip. But then Clara saw the boy tied to the saddle, and her blood ran cold. The man looked past Clara into the dim room. You've got the wrong place, she said. His voice was flat. I never do. Who's the boy? He stepped to the side so she could see clearer. The boy's eyes begged. He wandered too far from his camp, the man said. Figured he might be useful. You're one of them. The last one, he said. The others ran or died. You took something from us. A man who should have died quiet years ago. Isaiah saved lives. He ended others, the man said. That kind of arithmetic always demands balance. What do you want? He reached into his coat and pulled out a matchbox. He struck one against the porch post, the flame lingering. I want to watch it burn. Clara's eyes flicked to the boy, then back to the lit match. You so sure that's justice? I'm sure it's owed. A gunshot rang out from behind. Joe stood at the window, rifle raised. The match dropped. The man staggered back, the bullet grazing his arm. The horses shrieked and bolted. The boy fell sideways, scrambling to his feet, still gagged, but running toward Clara. The man drew his gun. Clara didn't flinch. She raised Robert's old shotgun and fired. The blast hit him full in the chest. He went down hard, skidding across the packed dirt. The echo rang out over the hills, then faded into silence. Clara didn't lower the gun. The boy stumbled into her arms. Joe rushed out, cutting the gag. Are you hurt? He shook his head, trembling. He said he'd burn it all. Said it'd be my fault. Clara pulled him close. You're safe now. From behind them, Isaiah limped onto the porch. That all of them? Joe nodded. Then it's done, he said, his voice ragged. Finally. The boy's name was Eli. Joe rode with him to the canyon's edge, where his people welcomed him back with wide arms. When she returned, dusk had fallen. The house was quiet. Macy met her on the porch. Did he find his mama? She asked. Joe crouched down. He did. Macy nodded. Good. That night, they didn't speak much. Isaiah sat at the table, bandaged and quiet. Clara sliced bread with her good arm, slow but steady. Joe laid Macy to sleep, humming something soft. The wind had changed, not warm, not cold, just different, like the land had exhaled. They had survived, but what came next would be harder. Learning how to live again. Spring came late that year, hesitant and slow, as if the land itself wasn't sure it was ready to forgive the winter. The scars on the Boone homestead never fully disappeared, but something else had taken root. Not just survival, something gentler, something more stubborn than fear. Macy was the first to change. Her voice grew louder, her laughter deeper. She stopped sleeping with her boots on, and she no longer whispered "Mama" with hesitation. She said it with certainty, sometimes to Joe, sometimes to Clara, sometimes to both without distinction. They never corrected her. The rhythm of life began to hum again. Isaiah rose each morning, limping but uncomplaining, to feed the chickens. He repaired the barn, beam by beam. Clara's shoulder healed in strange increments. She no longer feared the pain. It was a part of her now. Joe had become something new entirely. She didn't talk much about her past, but her presence was constant. She mended things. She cooked. She taught Clara how to trap rabbits, how to knot a rope one-handed. And every night she stood by the window and watched the stars, waiting, not for trouble, just for peace. It was Isaiah who brought the letter. He came in from town one evening, a brown envelope clutched in his hand. He handed it to Clara and stepped out onto the porch. She opened it slowly. A marshal's mark. The letter was short. To the occupants of the Boone homestead, we have concluded our investigation. We consider the matter closed. No charges will be filed. Be advised, remnants of the Riders of Dust may still pose a threat. Exercise caution. Marshal Gregor Wills. Clara passed the letter to Joe. She read it twice, then folded it neatly. The weight that lifted from her shoulders was visible. That night, the four of them sat on the porch. Joe held a sleeping Macy. The stars stretched wide above them. "You believe in second chances?" Clara asked, breaking the quiet. Isaiah took a long breath. "I believe the first one's a lie. Nobody gets it right the first time." Joe chuckled softly. "Amen to that." Clara tilted her head. "Then what do we call this?" Joe looked down at the sleeping child. "We call it a beginning." Isaiah shifted, drawing something from his coat. A tin badge, worn smooth at the edges. He held it out toward Clara. "That yours?" she asked. "Used to be. I've seen what happens when I wear it. Too many ghosts follow. But you know how to make things stay alive." Clara didn't take it. Not yet. "I'm not a lawman," she whispered. "No," Isaiah said. "You're what the law forgot to be." Clara took the badge and set it on the table beside her. Not as an answer, but as a possibility. Spring deepened. The fields began to green. Flowers pushed up through earth that had once run red. And when a storm rolled in, they worked through it shoulder to shoulder. And when it passed, Clara stood in the mud, soaked and bleeding from a cut, and laughed. Laughed until Joe joined her, until Isaiah chuckled, until Macy danced barefoot in the puddles. It felt like healing. The house changed. More chairs at the table, hooks by the door for tiny coats, a new garden behind the barn. Macy started calling Isaiah Papa one night, casually, like it had always been true. No one corrected her. Isaiah just swallowed hard and said, "That's right, little one." The land looked new, but the scars were still there. Joe sometimes woke with tears in her eyes. Isaiah flinched at thunder. Clara stared too long at the horizon, but they were alive, together. And when the wind blew cold again, they sat around the stove and told stories. None of them were about guns, not anymore. One night, long after the lamps were out, Macy stirred and whispered into the dark. "Mama?" Joe turned, half asleep. "I'm here." Clara's voice came softly from the doorway. "So am I." The girl smiled and fell asleep again. That was all she needed to hear. That was all she ever needed. If you were moved by this story of a family forged in fire, hit that subscribe button, because you won't want to miss the next tale we have for you. Drop a comment below and let us know which part hit you the hardest. Your support keeps these stories alive.